Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today we're going to talk about how brands manage expectations and the well-being of their audience and employees. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Julius Geis, founder and CEO of MUA. Julius, welcome to the show.
Hey, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. So why don't you start by giving me a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing with MUA?
Yeah, I would love to. My name is Julius. I'm born and raised in Germany. Went to school there, got my education there. Also started my first business in Germany before I moved over to the United States in 2016. Most of my career I worked as a brand strategist, consulted smaller brands and larger corporations. And today I'm mainly focusing on my startup, which is MUA. And here we are focusing on the building cultures around mental health and happiness of working people.
Wonderful. Well, let's start dive a little bit more into MUA and what you're doing there. So can you explain what it means and a little more of what it's all about?
Yeah. MUA stands for literally me, us, all. And the story is, when I created it, and I was, I got this idea of MUA, and maybe I can segue a little bit into, why I started in the first place. And
yeah.
I was, as I mentioned earlier, I worked in branding before, and I used branding in a very specific term. I used it for cultural building and change management. So my branding approach was less focused on the external aspects of a brand, like a logo or how a brand looks and all these kind of things. So my approach was more, how to use an intrinsic view, or how to build an intrinsic identity, and how do we use that then to build kind of like the foundation on how a company is built upon. And when I was working with leaders, CEOs, and different teams, many times I experienced when it came to the part of let's create the new vision, or let's define who we want to be and how do we want to serve as a company, that in these workshops, leaders were super clear in why they're in business and why they do what they do. And it was super exciting for me. And I thought, we have that nailed down and it will work just fine. However, about 2 or 3 weeks later, when I would check in with those same people and said, how's it going? And how's the new strategy coming along? How do how's the implementation stage, so to say? I would usually hear the same response, which would, I didn't have time. I was super busy. There were other things more important. And, all these kind of excuses or these states that I guess we all have experienced before, that, we just didn't do it what we have intended to do. And as a strategist, I was just wondering, well, how can I fix that? Because a strategy is worth nothing, in my opinion, if it can't get implemented, right?
Right.
So I was kind of like inspired by my own personal development that I have, that I experienced, which had to do with meditation and mindfulness practices and these kind of things. And I used one of these techniques and thought, how about I create a vehicle for these leaders that when we leave the workshop, I give them a tool so they can track from there on what they're actually doing, like, that they have a control about, what they have intended to do is actually what they're doing throughout their day. Because most of the time they got caught up at what I called the autopilot, and I wanted something that prevent them to go back to that program, and that was the starting point of MUA, and it's connecting daily activities with emotions. So you write down whatever you do throughout a day, and it's literally writing down from drinking a coffee to having a phone call to writing an email. It's very specific. And then you connect it with one of our 3 symbols. And by doing that, a person starts to pause and reflect. And by just doing that small exercise, you identifying those moments in time when you would kind of like segue away from your, initial intention, and when you would go back into the autopilot. And that concept kind of like led through building a whole company and a whole system around it.
What are some of the symptoms of organizations that do go back to autopilot? Again, best intentions, they go through exercises and they mean very well, but then to your point, a month later or so they're back there. Like how does someone know if they're on autopilot?
I mean, this is exactly the tricky part, because we usually don't. I mean, this is the definition of the autopilot, that we're not aware that someone else is driving our car right now. We're only aware if we ask the question, who is driving the car right now, if that makes any sense. So if you don't ask the question, as an organization, you don't know. And that's, in my experience, when an organization gets fatigued or struggles with innovation or struggles with any kind of change, because again, even if the intention was good at the beginning, since there is no environment that makes a company and organization pause and reflect, we usually just go back to what we are used to, which is that program, that autopilot, and without even recognizing it. So it's very crucial for a company to build in mechanisms that make you pause and simply ask the question. And it can be as simple as who is driving the car? If we use that metaphor of autopilot in car driving.
As far as the goal of your brand, MUA, what are you hoping to accomplish with that?
We want to help companies to exactly pause and reflect, to give them tools, a system around it that allow them to actually create a sustainable environment a sustainable environment around the topic of mental health and happiness. Because when it comes to mental health and happiness, the autopilot is a very crucial state, it's a very crucial component as well, because it does the same thing. If you are on autopilot, you do a lot of things that are actually not serving you, whether it's an individual or a team or entire organization. So MUA's whole purpose is to design a system that really sustainably change the work culture around mental health and happiness. And we do that in different, in different steps. Number one is that we are helping a company to make it a topic in the first place. So how to set a mission around mental health, so that there's an alignment within the company why they're using a tool like MUA. Then we're helping teams to actually use the tool and get a lot out of it. They get a lot of benefits out of the tool. And then we're training the company and the leaders what to do with what the outcome is when teams using tools like MUA. So that at the end, it's a complete cycle that really impacts the culture, and it's not just a Band-Aid, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and to kind of follow on to that, certainly given the last nearly 2 years now that we've been living through rapid changes, and certainly there's always change going on regardless of a global pandemic. It seems like brands are starting to, and some in very very early stages, but brands are starting to address mental well-being, other types of wellness in their programs. What makes MUA different than some of these other offerings?
I think two things like two things for me where MUA sticks out, in comparing to some of our competitors. The first thing is that we are designed as a system. So many of our competitors are more or less a tool. That I compare with a Band-Aid. You can fix something with it, but it usually does not ripple down into the culture and into an organizational change. And the other thing is the usability. When I built or when I started MUA, my highest like I say my highest my intention was, or the whole reason why I designed it in the first place was to give the user a tool that they actually want to use. So I know it sounds, like, oh, well, we all want to do that. But in my experience, a lot of these tools are actually not designed for the user. They're rather designed for the company to get analytics out of it. And that's where we're different. So we really focus on the user, the employee, to make it really simple. Our whole design approach is very simple. As I mentioned earlier, we're using symbolism. So our entire system of mindfulness is built on crossing off one of three symbols. We don't ask you questions. We don't give you surveys, deep formulas, or whatever is out there. We really try to keep it simple and to set the bar low so the participation rate is frequent and it's very high. And at the same time, that the learning experience for the user, so the employee, is guaranteed. And then the second step is, of course, we also offer some analytical background for the employer. So we like to call it the heart rate monitor for corporate happiness. But it's not like in detail as others do. Like, for example, Microsoft Viva or tool like that, who really go into enterprise level analytics of what your people are doing. We are not a monitoring system. So our highest priority is to secure personal data of employees, to make sure employees are using our tool, that they are learning with our tool, and that we can build and change company culture around corporate happiness and health.
Anytime we're talking about employers and employee mental health, mental wellness, and things, this takes a great deal of trust in order to do well, right? What do you think that what do brands need to do to build this trust so that their employees really know and understand that their employer is doing this with the right intentions?
I believe it's actually much simpler than we think. Just the simple fact to make it a topic and to be honest about it is what most employees are looking for. But what I experience in the practical reality is that most employers don't really want to deal with it. They just want to buy a tool, or they just want to they want to get something. And that's what I always call the Band-Aid, this Band-Aid. They just want to cover it up in a way, but they're not really interested in making a change. And from an employee perspective, that's all they want. They just want you as an organization to deeply care and to give them space that they can express themselves, where they can vulnerable, where they can be everything they are, and then facilitate that. And that, in my opinion, it's all it takes.
Yeah, I like that. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another thing that's currently going on. There's different names for it. One that's used quite frequently is the Great Resignation. So a lot of employees making changes, wanting to make changes, talking about making changes, and sometimes all of the above to their careers, and often with good reasons, and often based on a lot of different factors have been going into this, and I think it could be argued how long it's been kind of brewing for. But how do you look at the way that MUA and what you're doing addresses the relationship issue between employees and employers, given that we're in this time where a lot of employees are they're considering other options?
Yeah, no, first of all, you're right. It's definitely a topic, and it's impactful on both sides. I sometimes feel when we look at media that, we write a lot about the employee perspective, like, the people who like to change, but it's also very stressful on the employer. There are like research where magazines, or I think it was I forgot which magazine, was it the Harvard Business Journal or something, like where they reviewed or where they surveyed CEOs and how they, look towards the future when it comes to their resources of people and people management. And they also have a lot of fear and doubts how that, how that future look like. So again, I think MUA really helps to build conversation around the topic. That's how the system is designed in these steps that I have explained earlier, where we facilitate, first of all, the purpose why we're implementing something like MUA in the company, then on the team level and committing to learning, and then on the cultural level to get the kind of like the approval from the leadership that whatever results we gain by using MUA, we are willing to act to make them better. And I believe, that's the foundation of everything. So MUA really helps to communicate, to connect. And I believe, like, at least how I interpret the numbers and how I interpret the studies around the Great Resignation. So I am aware, there are just, some simplified and say people just want to change, or people want to change because of remote situations, or they're looking for more purpose and all that stuff. And I agree, there's probably a part of it. But if you look between the numbers, I interpret it as that people are just looking to be a part of something. They want to be connected with their organization. They want to be heard and they want to be seen. They want that an organization is let's say it's a living organism and not like a top-down infrastructure or something like that. So in my opinion, MUA truly helps in connecting and communicating as an organization. So that to me is a great cure for people, for people culture, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I guess to follow on to that, and you have a background in branding as well as with the work that you're currently doing. What do you think most companies are missing when when it comes to their branding having kind of a disconnect with employees? Like branding isn't the only reason why employees might consider leaving, but when a brand is inauthentic, I mean, we know from customers don't want to buy from them in increasing numbers, but also employees are likely to feel the falseness and things like that. So what advice would you give to brands that might feel like there's a disconnect or that they need to do something?
To be honest, Greg, my experience is that it mostly is about leadership. That my experience as a brand strategist many times that leaders would be all on board when it came to rebranding, as long as the marketing department is in charge and it's something beautiful, colorful, etc. But every time we reached that stage where we told them, well, now you guys are involved. You actually have to do something too. You have to live that change. You have to live these values that you write on paper. You have to adjust your policies, in relation to the brand that we have just built. That's where usually the disconnect starts, because they suddenly said, what do you mean? Like, you want me to do what? And I think this is really something that goes deeper. Like, you have a lot of companies where leadership is highly involved in their brand building, or basically the company is the intrinsic expression of a leader. And then you have companies where there's, mostly older structures, corporate structures, where there's a complete disconnect what the company, like the leadership of a company, how they act and what they represent and what they write on their brand or on their paper. And I truly believe that employees they just don't want to work in an environment like that anymore. In the same way, like people don't want to buy these products anymore because they're smarter, they are more curious, and they have choices. And I think they're playing these power cards nowadays.
Well, Julius, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do my best to be active on Twitter as well. The handle is at Julius Geis. And of course, you can check out MUA, which is wemua.com.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Julius Geis, founder and CEO of MUA, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.